Substance abuse issues, problems with the law, a rift with his former bandmate, Richie Sambora might have lived large, but his personal life had its struggles. Keep watching to stay ahead of the curve in Sambora's life. Richie Sambora got lucky in 1983 when he got the chance to become a part of Bon Jovi.
For decades, Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi were one of rock's most successful partnerships, creating legendary hits like Livin' on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive, and You Give Love a Bad Name. But behind the fame, fortune, and sold-out arenas, tensions were quietly building. Richie wasn't just the guitarist, he was a songwriter, creative partner, and a major force behind the band's success.
Please introduce me to your friend.
This is Richie Sambora, our lead
Richie,
guitar
nice to
player.
have you with us.
Led by vocalist Jon Bon Jovi, the Bon Jovi lineup has remained surprisingly consistent over the years, aside from a few tweaks in the early days and the usual addition of touring musicians.
Then, in 2013, he suddenly walked away. Now, years later, Richie is speaking more openly about what really happened. So, what went wrong between him and Jon Bon Jovi? Join us as we uncover the truth behind one of rock's most talked about breakups, the partnership that wasn't equal. Richie Sambora has always been in the limelight. In the early 1990s, he had already spent years as a working session guitarist. He played on albums for Cher, touring with her, and contributing to records that sold well. He was a professional musician who understood his craft deeply. But he was invisible. Session musicians are the invisible backbone of the music industry. They play, they get paid, and then they go home. Nobody knows them to even ask for their autograph. His life changed when he met Jon Bon Jovi in 1982. Jon was just 20 years old, a kid from Perth Amboy himself, with a record deal from Mercury Records and absolutely zero hits. He had energy, ambition, and connections, but he needed something else. He needed someone who could actually play guitar at a professional level and contribute creatively to songwriting. Someone who understood structure and arrangement. Richie auditioned, and the chemistry was immediate. Richie got the gig. It was 1983, and neither of them had any idea they were about to become one of the most successful rock acts in history. That first album, released in 1983, barely registered commercially. It sold around 200,000 copies, respectable for a debut, but nothing that suggested what was coming. The record labels started getting nervous about whether they had a hit or a flop. Nobody knew yet. Then, 3 years later, Slippery When Wet changed absolutely everything about their lives and careers. The album moved 30 million copies worldwide over the next decade. It was one of the best-selling rock albums of all time. Every single song on that record became a hit. MTV played the videos constantly. Radio couldn't get enough of it. And Richie Sambora was on every single track, playing intricate guitar solos and contributing creatively to the songwriting. He wasn't just the guitarist, he was a creative architect of the entire sound. The guitar work on those songs defined the album. And the songwriting contributions? That's where the real partnership showed up. Richie didn't just play riffs that Jon had already written. He participated in the actual creation of the songs from the ground up. Take Livin' on a Prayer. This song is one of the most recognizable rock anthems ever recorded. Millions of people have heard it. Most of them think Jon Bon Jovi wrote it alone. But that's not what happened. Richie Sambora co-wrote that song. He contributed to the melody, the chord structure, and the overall arrangement. It was a genuine collaboration. But here's where the problems started happening. When the album credits came out, Jon Bon Jovi's name appeared first, always first, while Richie's name was smaller, lower, less important visually. And when the songwriting royalties started coming in, the split wasn't equal. Jon had negotiated a deal where he received a larger percentage as the front man of the band. Richie accepted it at the time. They were both young. They were grateful to have a record deal at all. Neither of them imagined they'd sell 30 million albums. But by 1990, as the money kept rolling in, Richie started doing the math carefully. He realized he'd signed away millions of dollars. That deal was locked in. He couldn't renegotiate it without destroying the band. And Jon had no incentive to voluntarily give up money he was legally entitled to keep. The resentment didn't explode immediately. It built quietly, behind the scenes, year after year. And then Richie tried to do something on his own, and Jon shut it down. What did he try to do? The solo attempt that changed everything. In 1991, while still actively playing in Bon Jovi, Richie decided to record a solo album. It wasn't supposed to be competitive with the band. It was supposed to be a side project where Richie was exploring his own artistic voice while Bon Jovi was between albums. The record was called Stranger in This Town, and it was actually really good. The album charted well. It got radio play. The song The Kiss was a beautiful acoustic track that proved something important, and that was Richie Sambora could write compelling material on his own, and he didn't need Jon. He was a complete musician in his own right. But Jon Bon Jovi's response sent a clear message to everyone involved. When Richie wanted to tour behind the solo album to support it properly, Jon essentially said no, and that band needed him. They were working on new material, and there wasn't time for a solo tour. The implications were obvious. You're in Bon Jovi first, everything else comes second. Richie backed off. He shelved the solo career and went back to being the guitar player in Jon Bon Jovi's band. That was the deal. Then, in 1992, Bon Jovi released Keep the Faith, and something had fundamentally changed in how the songwriting credits were being handled overall. More songs were listed as written by Jon Bon Jovi alone. Songs that Richie had actively participated in writing were suddenly credited solely to Jon. When Richie asked about it, he was told it was a business decision to simplify the credits for the album packaging. What that actually meant, Jon's management team was deliberately establishing a narrative about creativity. The narrative was that Jon Bon Jovi was the sole creative force behind Bon Jovi. He was the genius and the songwriter in the band, while everyone else, including Richie, was hired to help. They played their instruments well, but they didn't write the music. Why did this matter so much financially and professionally? Because in the music industry, the narrative controls the money. If Jon was the creative force, he could do a solo album and have it be seen as a real Jon Bon Jovi project. If Richie was the creative force, his solo work would also have legitimacy. But if the industry believed Jon was the sole genius, then Jon's solo work was real, and Richie's was just the guitar player trying something different. Richie felt it deeply. He wasn't stupid. He understood the game being played. In interviews from 1993 and 1994, he started making carefully worded comments. "I'm more than just the guy who plays guitar solos," he'd say. But those comments barely made it into print. The rock media was obsessed with Jon Bon Jovi. Richie's voice got lost. By 1994, Richie was drinking more. He was frustrated with the situation. He was tired of playing 200 shows a year for a band that was systematically erasing him from its own story. He was starting to realize that the partnership he thought they had was one-sided. Jon was building a brand, and that brand only had room for one name. And then Jon made a move that made it impossible to ignore reality anymore. The moment the partnership officially died. In 1995, Bon Jovi announced they were going on hiatus. The band was burned out from touring, and they needed a break. That was the official story released to the press. What wasn't announced was the real reason the hiatus was happening. According to reports from music journalists at the time, tension in the band had reached a breaking point. Jon wanted to make a solo album. He wanted to establish himself as a solo artist with his own identity separate from the band. Richie wanted the same thing. He wanted to make another solo album and tour behind it. But they couldn't both do that simultaneously while Bon Jovi was active. One of them had to step back. Jon made the call. Bon Jovi would take a break. Jon would go first with a solo album. And implicitly, Richie would wait his turn. Richie was furious, but he didn't go public with it. Instead, he watched as Jon Bon Jovi's solo album, Blaze of Glory, was released in 1990 and dominated the rock radio. The album had high-profile marketing behind it. MTV played the music videos constantly. Jon appeared on talk shows. The message was clear: Jon Bon Jovi is a solo artist. Jon Bon Jovi is a creative force. Jon Bon Jovi makes hit records. Then it was Richie's turn. In 1998, he released his second solo album, Undiscovered Soul. The record was darker, more introspective, more emotionally raw than his first effort. It was good. Critics acknowledged that. But commercially, it flopped compared to his first album. Why did it fail commercially? Because the market had already been told who the real solo artist was. Jon Bon Jovi had already established his solo presence as the legitimate creative force. Richie's album came out into a landscape where Jon had already controlled the narrative. Richie was just the guitar player trying to go solo. Jon was the genius establishing his solo credentials. The message was unmistakable. There wasn't room in the industry for both of them to be successful solo artists. There was only room for Jon. When Bon Jovi reunited in 2001 for the album Bounce, things were fundamentally different from how they'd been in the 1980s. Richie was still there, still playing, still performing on every track. But the dynamic had changed at a structural level. Jon wasn't just the lead singer anymore. Jon controlled the band. Not just creatively, legally, and financially, Jon owned Bon Jovi. Richie was an employee. Year after year, they toured. The same songs, the same arenas, the same dynamic where Jon made the decisions and Richie followed orders. By 2005, Richie was struggling with addiction. He checked into rehab and then came back. The touring continued, and that dynamic never changed. Then, in 2018, Jon made the move that finally broke whatever remained of their friendship. The firing that wasn't a conversation. In 2018, Jon Bon Jovi announced something big. The band was reuniting. They were going on tour and were recording a new album. He called it the This House Is Not For Sale tour, and fans went absolutely crazy. The original lineup was getting back together. This was huge for rock music nostalgia. But Richie Sambora wasn't included in the reunion plans. Instead of calling Richie, instead of having a conversation, instead of negotiating, Jon brought in Phil X as the guitarist. Phil X is a talented player who had been playing with Bon Jovi in live shows already. But he wasn't Richie, who co-wrote the classic songs. He wasn't part of the original band that made those albums. The official statement from Bon Jovi's camp was that Richie was unavailable. That's all they said. Jon made a decision and announced it to the press before Richie even knew what was happening. Richie found out from news outlets. He found out like a fan would find out, by reading it on the internet. That hurt deeply. And what hurt worse was what it meant. Jon had decided unilaterally that Richie was no longer part of Bon Jovi, and Richie had no say in the matter. The financial implications were massive. In modern rock music, touring is where the real money lives. Album sales barely generate revenue anymore. Streaming pays pennies. But touring, playing live shows night after night. That's where musicians make millions. By removing Richie from the tour, Jon was removing his access to millions of dollars in touring revenue. This wasn't just a creative decision. It was a financial execution. In interviews throughout 2019 and 2020, Richie started opening up about what had actually happened. He explained that Jon had removed him without any discussion, that the decision was made unilaterally, that if Richie wanted to negotiate or discuss it, he'd have to go through management, the same management that worked for Jon and answered to Jon. The dynamics were crystal clear. Jon had all the power. Richie had none. What Richie revealed next shocked people who'd been paying attention to the details. The systematic erasure from history. In a 2021 interview on the Sirius XM Jagger Show, Richie Sambora said something that revealed the depth of the hurt. Jon and I haven't really had a conversation in years. When the interviewer asked if reconciliation was possible, Richie paused. That pause said everything. Then he said, "I don't know if that's possible anymore." That single pause contained decades of pain. But what Richie started discussing in interviews was something even more troubling than the personal rift between them. He started pointing out a pattern. The band's official history, the version told on their website, in their authorized biographies, in documentaries, kept changing over time. And the changes always went in the same direction, toward erasure. Early Bon Jovi materials, from the 1980s and 90s, called Richie a co-founder. Later materials, from the 2000s onward, called him a member. Then, just a guitarist. His role kept getting smaller in the official narrative. Photo archives got edited. Old band photos that featured Richie prominently got replaced with new ones that cropped him out or minimized his presence. Live footage of Richie's performances got cut from band documentaries. His name started disappearing from songwriting credits on streaming platforms. The same song would have different credits on different music services. Sometimes Richie Sambora would be listed as a co-writer. Sometimes the credit would just say, Jon Bon Jovi. Same song, two different versions of history. In 2022, something unexpected happened. Bon Jovi announced a reunion. But this time, Richie was included. They did a Vegas residency together at a local casino. For a moment, it seemed like the rift might heal. Richie was back. They were playing together again. Fans were happy. The band looked like a real band again. But the reunion was temporary. It was limited to Vegas. It was a quick fix for fans who'd been asking where Richie was. And when the residency ended, there was no indication of a larger tour or new album together. The reunion was symbolic, not substantial. Richie later described that Vegas run as a moment, not a movement. A quick moment where things felt normal. But nothing fundamental had changed. Jon still controlled the band. Richie was still the hired help brought in for a limited engagement. Then, in 2024, Richie did something unexpected. He went on record about money. The conversation that revealed everything. In a 2024 interview with Ultimate Classic Rock, Richie Sambora finally addressed the financial structure of Bon Jovi directly. He talked about things that had been bothering him for decades, but that he'd never discussed publicly before. He revealed that the songwriting split had always been structured to favor Jon. That touring revenue was divided unequally, with Jon taking a larger share as the band's leader. When business decisions were made about the band's direction, his vote didn't count the same as Jon's. That he'd spent 40 years as a second-class partner in a band he'd helped create. He also revealed something very specific. When he'd approached Jon in 2017 and 2018 about being included in the reunion tour, Jon had told him directly the band was Jon's to control. That Richie was part of the past, not the future, and that if Richie wanted to play Bon Jovi music, he could do tribute shows or solo acoustic performances. But the real Bon Jovi belonged to Jon. Those words destroyed whatever remained of their friendship. Richie said they essentially ended any possibility of reconciliation. In that same 2024 interview, Richie said something that captured the full scope of what he'd lost. "I gave 40 years of my creative life to building something that I never truly owned." He wasn't being dramatic or exaggerating. He was being factual about the reality he'd lived through. And at the end, after all that time and effort and creative contribution, he was treated as disposable. He could be removed from the band with no conversation. He could be excluded from reunion tours. His songwriting contributions could be rewritten in the official history. What makes Richie Sambora's story important isn't just the drama involved. It's the reality it exposes about how the music industry actually works. The guitarist and the songwriter often get erased from the narrative. The lead singer, especially one with business savvy like Jon Bon Jovi, controls the story. Everyone else is just a supporting cast in someone else's story. Richie Sambora co-wrote "Livin' on a Prayer." That's a documented fact. But if you asked 100 random people who wrote that song, probably 95 of them would say Jon Bon Jovi. That's not an accident. That's the result of 40 years of deliberate narrative control by people with financial incentive to make sure only one name is remembered. At 65, Richie Sambora is finally saying out loud what should have been obvious to everyone all along. He mattered. He contributed creatively. He shaped the sound of an entire generation. He deserves to be remembered as more than just the guitar player. Whether Jon Bon Jovi ever acknowledges that is beside the point now. What do you think? Did Jon Bon Jovi owe Richie Sambora a better ending? And should co-writers get equal credit in rock history? Or does the lead singer deserve top billing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.